Thank you, everyone. As I mentioned, Mike is President and CEO of EDAWN, Economic Development Authority of Western Nevada. Bob is my fellow economist from GoEd, and Tina, who we all know and love, is the President and CEO of the LVGEA.
I want to make it really clear because I think a lot of people don't understand the difference between an abatement and a tax credit. So there isn't this pot of money out there that the state is giving to companies to come and locate here in the form of credits. That's not happening. It is you come here and some of the tax burden will be reduced on you for X number of years. And I think it's generally about 2 years. And we need those in order to stay competitive with other regions who have tax incentive programs. And generally they are more aggressive than ours. We've got, as I understand it, a more conservative tax abatement program, tax incentive program than others. Once the business, so people think, well, why do we need to attract businesses here with abatements? That's lost tax revenue. I think we could debate that that is not lost tax revenue because that business may choose to not locate here if we don't have that abatement and that incentive. I was just talking with our team today, and with the jobs that we have brought here over the last 10 years, we've brought in an additional LVGEA has helped companies relocate here, and those that we have helped bring here have brought in an additional $1.1 billion to the state in their tax contribution. So again, it's not a credit, it's an abatement, and it's not in perpetuity, it is for a tenured amount of time. So, and as a result of you having a Tesla, it's brought on ancillary businesses and other activities, even local activities, so dry cleaners, grocery stores, banks, etc. There's that domino effect, or that, what you call it, the indirect
multiplier.
Yeah,
Multiplier.
the indirect multiplier that comes with it. So it's not even just about that direct project. It's got larger concentric circles.
So if we go back and we look at the math on this, the ROI on our tax abatements from an economic impact side is about $250 for every dollar abated. The Reno Sparks MSA was a very different place on October 10, 2010, wasn't it, Mike, than what it is now, right? That's when the paper came out and said, will Reno become the next Detroit of the West, right? And there were a lot of things that were set in motion where the stars kind of lined up, right? And so, you know, there was a trick, the industrial center that was out there. Reno's got great quality of life and those sort of things. And then you bring cohesiveness where everybody's starting to work together with leadership that is very strategic about what they want to get done, and this is what you end up with 10 years later, right? So that's just an example of what really strategic economic development that has a whole diversification structure built into it, right? We as a state as a whole, we need to think about, okay, so what's going on with EDAWN, what's going on with LVGEA, what's going on with the 6 other RDAs in the state. You look at Southern Nevada, 75% of the population and the jobs are down here, 20% are in the Reno Sparks MSA. The balance is in this huge geography, right? We just by definition are a diverse state. We're simultaneously both the most urban and rural state in the United States. We're the most mountainous state in the United States. We became a majority minority in the 2020 census. There's just a whole bunch of things that creates like this hybrid vigor if we get it done right, right? And so that's really our goal, is to figure out how do we get everybody to be the best at what they're doing for their regions that lifts it for everybody, considering our comparative advantage, our proximity to the 5th largest economy in the world. What's the difference between the Bay Area and the Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach? How do we tie in with Utah, Arizona? How are we thinking about how that all works together? What's the unique characteristics of our mining counties? What's the unique characteristics of the ag counties that we have? Thinking about all those things and then empowering them to succeed.
Well, the North, Tina mentioned mega regions. We're aligned with San Francisco. And if you made that drive north to south, and a lot of people don't realize, because I get calls all the time and say, well, I'm in Vegas, why don't I come by and say hi? It's like, okay, either get on an airplane or prepare for a 7 or 8 hour drive. Totally different. So as a state, we are very different. We work with different companies. We have different focuses. And there are many times when on the economic development front, someone calls us and we say, well, you're not a good fit for this region. Why don't you give, LVGEA a call? Or why don't you give, one of the other RDAs a call? And we do that often. In fact, we turn down now up in the Reno Sparks area more people that call than we actually ask or work with. We turn people away. We say, you can't succeed here. Here are some other options. So as a state, working together is incredibly important, and I think what we've done up north can be replicated down here at some point. Diversification, obviously, is the key to economic development, in my view.
Sometimes I think we forget there's a huge qualitative difference in the quality of I-80 and its access to markets across the country and the quality of I-15. I-80 is a much more direct link to the East Coast than I-15 is. So we just have to understand that. That's why understanding our competitive advantages and what we're good at and what we're not good at, or we're not as a competitive at, we just got to understand those things and not kind of get lost in some of our own PR, so to speak, as I like to say.
So they can even get very competitive amongst themselves.
Mike, what do you see? How do you see it from your side?
Well, we don't lose many projects, at least not until recently. Once we get a chance to work with them, we're pretty successful ultimately. Recently, we're losing them for two reasons: housing affordability, and Christine talked about our goal on that. I don't think anyone realizes how big the problem is. Housing is an incredibly large problem, not just here, pretty bad up north. Nationally, it's a gigantic issue, and companies can't get employees to move if they're not paying $30 an hour. So our goal on average wage for the companies we attract is $65,000 a year. If you're not making $65,000, and you think about that in manufacturing, you got to pay someone $30 minimum, $30 an hour to get even close to that. We don't even talk to them, and yet they still can't afford to live in a place where the average wage to median home price is going at over $600,000. You can't find one to build. You can't find one to buy. You can't even rent now a one-bedroom for under $1,300, $1,400 if you can find one with 2% vacancy. So housing, and Christine talked about that, and the $500 million, and I love, Christine is amazingly positive. I will support her any way I can, but $500 million is nothing. Sounds like a lot? It builds 167 apartment units. 167, $500 million. The average cost per door in apartments in the Reno-Sparks area is $300,000. Our need as a community per year is 6,000 units. 5 to 6,000, we just had a study done. $500 million builds 167 of them. Now, you can leverage public money and do all this other stuff and maybe get that number up to 2,000. That's 1 year. When the clock starts over next year, that $500 million isn't going to be there. We got to go again. So we got to figure out the housing issue in the state, or our homeless is going to get even worse. We can imagine that. And all our youth is going to have to go somewhere else to live. So I rate that as really the most critical issue. And then workforce attraction. I mean, you got to have workforce, and then our school systems, needless to say, are not the best. And so we're trying to get robotics in every classroom. When we started this initiative 3 years ago, we had 10 classrooms in Washoe County with robotics training and programs. We're now up to about 25 to 30%, and we set a goal in the community of every school in Washoe County will have robotics programs and competitions. I think First Robotics has followed that and set that as a goal for the state. Those are the skills that will feed the jobs of the future, that will get someone paid enough to actually live in our region, and I think your prices are going up as well. So I would say, those two things cost us. Down here, the reason they jump over, incentives, Tina hit on that. I think we don't have shovel-ready project ground. The cost to get something up and running is pretty darn difficult. And back to the workforce.
Yeah, I think he's right. Workforce, yeah. If we can't pump out the employees that they need, they're going to have to go.
Right, during the Great Recession, or getting people back to work in this recovery period that we went through now, our focus now has to be what Mike was saying, is all about really good jobs, really good high-paying jobs that actually create opportunities so that folks can afford to live in these regions.
But as a community, have we had a true 10-year plan? And I do that only because I was talking with Arizona Phoenix not too long ago, and they were talking about the fact that they have a what do we want to look like in 10 years plan. And when you have that plan in place and you continue to have all the oars rowing in that direction, even though there are these external events that are happening in our economy, as long as and I'm simplifying things here, John, I know, but if we have that goal that we're heading towards, we accept the things that are going on, but we will still stay focused on where we're trying to head, that big, hairy, audacious goal as it is for our community.
You can't deal with 8% inflation and expect families and businesses to increase their travel and to come to Vegas and to party, other than maybe a few bachelor parties. When an economy depends on a lot of discretionary spending and a likely recession is looming, some people would say we're probably into it already, it's going to be bad. What does that mean to all of us with jobs? You know, there'll be job losses, there'll be home losses, there'll be issues, in large part because down here, the diversification doesn't allow for some moderation of that. Up north, we have gaming and tourism as well. It's gone from 25% of our economy to 5, 6, 7, 8%. So if they take a 50% hit, we're still doing fine. We're still manufacturing. We still have logistics, distribution, and a lot of that's down here as well. But the biggest thing we have is technology growth. And those are the jobs that'll be here in the next 10 years. If you read the Brookings report, 40% of the jobs that exist now will be gone in 10 years, replaced by automation. John mentioned automation, AI, robotics, gone. What are we doing with those employees that are going to look for another job? If we can upskill them, bring in the right jobs, and diversify the state, not just down here, but the state, these storms will be weathered a lot easier. So in my view, it's going to be bad. There's going to be a recession, and Vegas is going to go in the tank as it always does when discretionary spending dries up.
I think that there's some great things that have happened down here in southern Nevada that were pandemic-induced, okay? The new job numbers came out this morning, and so I think just what I could read on my phone, we're still down about 5,000. We're below 5,000 jobs below pre-pandemic highs. Okay, but if you look under the hood of that, we're still down 34,000 leisure and hospitality jobs, but we're up 20,000 transportation, distribution, warehousing jobs, and that's all happening down here. There's a fundamental shift because, you know, the pie stayed the same size, right? We're about back to pre-pandemic employment levels, but these pie slices are changing. And in part, they're changing because we went through this whole goods purchase effort, right? Because everybody was buying online from Amazon and everything else. We got hurt on the service side because this tends to be a real service-based economy. So I think that there's some dynamics that are happening there, and Southern Nevada's starting to win. If I go back to the 2005-ish or so, you look at the number of logistics and operations jobs in Northern Nevada, they were growing at about the same rate. The leisure and hospitality jobs were falling down. So there's this replacement. But with that replacement, and as those workers transfer, and they don't have to buy a house, they own a house. So, you know, kids are in a school, they have neighbors, right? So you don't have to worry about those kind of costs. If we can get them retrained and whatever into these kind of industries like this, that actually pay better and have more opportunity. And then you think about where logistics and operations, warehousing, then you start get light manufacturing, you get assembly manufacturing. Assembly manufacturing turns into more advanced manufacturing. You start bringing in technology, and then you start bringing research and development in, and you start having an ecosystem that happened in Northern Nevada, and I see that happening down here if we're really smart and think about how we're gonna build on this natural undertow that's already going on that was pandemic induced. It's so much easier to row with the current that's under us than to row across it or against it. So I think there's some opportunities here. Now, there are these big risks that John's talked about, right? These geopolitical events. You know, 20% of the wheat in the world is grown between Russia and Ukraine. That's a big deal, and wheat and food are pretty low on Maslow's hierarchy. We got to think about those kind of things, and we're all tied together. That the pandemic made pretty clear, right? The whole inflation thing, you got to go back to your basic micro class, right? Where it's supply and demand, it's price and quantity, right? And so when all of a sudden you have arguably $44 billion flow into the state of Nevada in some sort of stimulus package, and nobody's going to argue that it wasn't necessary, that it kept business afloat and everything else, that's the equivalent of a quarter of our annual GDP. Well, the definition, the textbook definition of GDP is the gross total value of all goods and services produced. And so you have to say, okay, well, we didn't fully produce because of those dollars. So all that money came in and it helped us buy a whole bunch of stuff, right? And pretty soon you have these supply chain issues where it can't keep up with the amount of demand that's out there for these goods, right? So the prices go up and you have all this inflation. It's just a natural evolution, right? And so the Fed's trying to one of the other ways it happens is you make money cheap. You keep the interest rates low. That's how you keep things from really going sideways in a depression or a recession, right? And so the Fed is taking these steps to kind of tap the interest rates back up without tipping us into a recession. My hope is, they have been riding an amazingly tight balance line between keeping the economy going when we had to have all these close downs and everything else. And now that they're all back and thinking about more variants coming along, man, it's a tough balance because there's this inextricable inverse correlation between the health situation and the economic situation. So, it could really go sideways. I give it a higher probability that it's going to go flat, and these highly procyclical economies it's going to be softer, but not.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate on that. How are these three issues of land scarcity, water, the drought, and automation affecting or maybe causing you guys to revisit your target industries?
Yeah, bingo, John. So these issues, even though I know that we've kind of subtly known about them, they've really surfaced as being very loud issues just in the past few months. And, candidly, our SEDS document, our economic development strategy plan, does not really thoroughly address those. There are some it's a document like this, of which there are maybe a few paragraphs that talk about the scarcity, looming scarcity of water and land. You're the one, you have taught me that we've got about 8 years left of developable employment land in our inventory. And that's if we were to continue growing at the rate that we've been growing, we've got about 8 years left of supply of land for employment purposes. Water Authority will tell you that if we were to continue consuming at the rate that we're consuming, we have about 4 to 5 years left of water before we need to dip into reserves. Now, that is where their conservation plan comes in. If we can get down from 116 gallons per day per capita down to 86 gallons per day per capita, then we've got a very, very sustainable water plan. And we are recognized globally for having one of the most responsible water security plans. So I know we're in good hands, but those are issues that, you're right, do affect the types of target industries that we have traditionally gone after, and now what we need to go after. In fact, we get requests for information from companies who are looking to relocate, and they'll send out RFIs to different cities asking, for what opportunities do you have in your community, and increasingly we are not responding to any RFIs if it looks like it's going to be a high water user. So that means that sometimes there is some manufacturing in there, like a bottling plant, a soup plant, anything that consumes our water, and then that water is taken outside of our community. If it's not water that's going to go back into Lake Mead, that's a concern, and it does change the strategy.
Automation is the part that scares me the most, because the kind of workforce we need to be successful and live in this state needs to be educated. And we are one of we invest least in our kids. We don't support education funding. That reset upon sale would have helped education funding. It would have helped a lot of things. We don't value how important it is to educate the workforce of the future now. And so until we figure that one out, and not at the bottom of the barrel, literally, of educating our kids, we are going to fight and fight and fight to get companies in here. And what they're going to do is say, well, you guys don't have talent. They're going to try and import talent. The talent can't afford to be imported, so they won't come here. And it's going to force a statewide pullback of some magnitude. So that, to me, in our view, is the top issue for the state, educating the future workforce. If we do that, talent comes. If we do that, a lot of smart things follow. And we're not doing it.
If you look around the country and look at the metro areas around the country, the small metros, the larger metros, you cannot have healthy environment, a natural environment, without a healthy economy. They're all related. You have to have balanced growth, you have to have smart growth, whatever the euphemism is today, but you cannot have a healthy environment or natural environment without a healthy economy with workers that are paid well, that have good jobs, that can afford, where the taxes are generated to help protect the environment. So keep in mind, there's always this balance between economic growth, economic development, and protection of the environment.